appreciate you allowing me to come talk to you today. I have some not so good news and hopefully some somewhat potential good news. As you know, the General Assembly has really been active as far as election legislation this session. One of the things is House Bill 607, which would require the use of paper ballots. It stayed in the House Elections Committee up until last week. For some reason, they brought it back. When they did, instead of bringing it before the House for a vote, they did change it. This is a somewhat potential good news. They did change it to a study bill. Where that's potential good news is the study is to be done before the next general session, if it passes the Senate. It did go before the House. It did pass that and is now sitting in the Senate waiting for passage. The bad news is the bill itself. I listened to the debate while it was in the Elections Committee, and basically they want to get rid of direct record electronic voting machines. In short, the Ivotronics. There are 36 counties, including Alleghany, that have Ivotronic voting machines. What this bill does, what this study bill does now, it has put a moratorium on purchasing any new voting machines through August of next year, and it wants to conduct that study. The complaints that were heard in the committee meeting basically came down to they could not receive paper receipts stating how showing what they voted for, long lines, machine error in calibration, things of that nature. So it did pass as a study bill. If it does go through in the next general session, what it will mean for Alleghany County is, as soon as it becomes law, the Ivotronics will be decertified and Alleghany will be required to purchase new voting machines, optical scans. M100s are no longer being made. Therefore, Alleghany would be required to purchase DS200s, which is the next step up from the M100s. They do have an electronic screen, but they are optical scan, which requires paper ballots. To do so, it would cost Alleghany County anywhere between $123,870 to $131,850, and that is a ballpark. I was hoping to bring you a smaller number, but in my research, I'm sorry, but that's about what we're looking at. It would require Alleghany to purchase approximately 15 DS200s at $5,995 a piece, which would be, just for those machines, $89,925. Because the DS200s are not ADA compliant, where the Ivotronics each are ADA compliant, we would have to purchase Automark machines. That could be anywhere from 11 machines to 15 machines. So that's where your play comes in. 11 machines at $1,995 a piece would be $21,945. 15 machines would be $29,925. It would require the purchase of privacy booths. Ivotronics come with their own privacy booths. DS200s do not, because you have one or two per precinct, so you have to have some place for the voter to fill out a ballot. You're looking at approximately 40 at $150 a piece, which is about $6,000. Ballots. Ivotronic counties are exempt from the statutory requirement of 110% of ballots purchased per election. That would remove that exemption. Ballots roughly, on the low side, cost 25 cents per ballot. to meet the 110% required by statute, at today's figure of registered voters in Alleghany, we would have to purchase 8,000 ballots per election. That does not include the primaries where you have more than one ballot style. So if you look at the last year's primary ballot, we had 7 ballot styles. So 8,000 times 7 for one election. If you look just at one ballot style, you're looking at $2,000 per election. Again, that's one ballot style. That does not include the PCMCIA cards that would be required. These are memory cards that will have the election burned onto them that you have to include. In doing my research, the research that I did was I contacted M100 counties, optical scan counties, and I've asked them what they had to have per State Board of Elections and statute. They have 3 sets of PCMCIA cards per machine. They run about $15 to $30 depending on where you purchase them. Needless to say, I try to get as inexpensive as I can. But that would be per machine. I do not have that figure because it's just one of those items that you just don't know about yet. Paper rolls, thermal paper rolls, separate ballot bags per ballot type. I did come up with a case of 100 runs anywhere between $38 to $56 for the ballot bags, and these are the plastic ones that seal on themselves. Ink cartridges for the auto marks. I have heard that they run through those like crazy, and those go $25 to $40 per cartridge. And of course there are others. This also does not include storage needs. What we're looking at now, we have minimal storage need because the 28 Ivotronics that we have fold into a small space. If this bill passes in the next general session, we're looking at a storage facility that will fit approximately 30 voting machines, and if you don't know how big the M100s are, they're fairly large size. Also 40 booths. Also ballots and election materials for up to 24 months as required by statute. And I regret to give you this information, however, it is my responsibility to provide you with all fiscal matters regarding elections. This is something that I urge you to please contact your representatives in the House and in the Senate. The arguments that they have put forth are not strong arguments. Invite them to come and watch an election. I will gladly host anybody that you invite to watch how we test, how we conduct an election using an Ivotronic machine. This will be a huge cost. My recommendation to my board and to the commissioners is to go ahead and start preparations for that cost. The General Assembly as it stands in this session has not been favorable. The voter ID bill, as I'm sure you're aware, is sitting in the Senate now. It is in the Rules Committee. That is headed by Senator Apodaca. As of the Supreme Court ruling on the Voting Rights Act, they have gone wild, I think is a good word, regarding election legislation that is sitting in the Rules Committee now. They have come out saying that this will be an elections omnibus bill. One of the things that will be in that bill is, I'm expecting, eliminating same-day registration, which occurs during one stop. It will also be shortening one stop from 17 days to anywhere from 10 to 6 days. Where that applies to you as commissioners, fiscally, it will require more workers and longer time. because the lines will be long. Over half of our voters vote one stop. It will also, it will include probably making the judges partisan races. That is something that I've been hearing often. It will also include, I'm expecting, changing the rights of elections observers. That's a popular one. And the restoration of felons' rights to vote. That one has come up numerous times. The election observer rights, the rights of felons upon completion of their parole and probation, and the shortening of one stop have all been sponsored by Senator Suchek, which is our representative. And they are all sitting there waiting, and I'm expecting that bill to come out this week or next before they close or adjourn for the session. Again, I apologize, but I am here to answer any questions that you may have regarding this news.
So the reality is, on 607, the study bill is exactly that. What needs to happen, I'm sure the State Board of Elections is already requesting you for a lot of this information. That study bill is gonna basically study the cost, right?
They have already done one fiscal study, but that's the Elections Committee only.
So
This study goes to the Joint Elections Oversight Committee. They will look into it further. There have been some requests already to the State Board of Elections, and we have had some requests sent down to us. But it has, right now, the State Board is waiting for the voter ID bill.
So ultimately, on the 607, you know, two things for the board, this board is that, one is you may agree with the changes. I mean, I don't know, with the paper ballots or not the paper ballots, that's one thing you have to internally think about and choose whether or not you agree or not agree. The second issue is whether you agree or not, it's more money, if it does get implemented. And so I would think that our next step within the next year is to lobby the state officials or state legislators. If they feel strong enough that this needs to be changed, then will they step up and help us purchase the new equipment? Because we went through this entire long process of getting all these things, whether it be the touch screen or the paper ballots approved. The state went through and, you know, we can't go out and buy other machines. These are only machines we were allowed to buy when they went through this process. It was either these touch screens or that. The state did step up and fund these things, which we're grateful for. So if this is gonna proceed forward, then I think at some point, you know, this board would lobby and take some action to recommend or request the state that they're gonna make these dramatic changes, that they assist in the funding side of it. That, you know, ultimately, I think that's where it's gonna come down to, whether it's passed or not. And there's, if I understand you correctly, Kate, I mean, there's not only just cost, you know, we gotta look at it in a couple different ways. There's cost, funding, and then there's ongoing funding, additional costs that the elections director just mentioned to us. So within the next year, that would be the lobbying to make sure, once their study is done, which I'm sure is gonna be an overall cost associated with it, that we would lobby our legislators to help us with those costs, if they're gonna proceed with this. Now,
Let me
again.
give you some more bad news.
Hmm?
And I need to make you aware of this.
Mhm.
In regards to this study, they did also look at the HAVA funds, Help America Vote Act. In order to have access to the $4 million that is remaining, that North Carolina is eligible for, they have to appropriate $390,871. As of right now, General Assembly is not willing to do that. The note specifically says, this note assumes that the local governments will pay for the equipment.
And that's why we gotta do it a lobby. I don't really care where they get the money.
I'm sorry.
You said something about good news, is that it's a study business? That's the good
We
news?
basically have a stay right now. The somewhat also potential good news, so far in this session, the Senate has not been favorable to study bills. So while it sits in the Senate, they may not act on it, they may vote it down. Where my skepticism lies is in the fact that they are looking at making some serious changes to North Carolina elections. So I don't foresee them letting this bill sit and die. I just see us having to stay for about a year.
And that was the point, just kind of going back to our budget, you know, this board did leave in the purchase. I'm not saying, Kate, this takes care of all your problems, but if you recall, we had multiple computers leased in this upcoming budget.
Right.
And we were trying to cause several of these walls that could be coming down, that's gonna cause automation at the polls. We were unknown at the time, it was unknown at the time, but that's the reason I left it in there. I felt pretty comfortable that this legislation was gonna do something. And so that would cause a requirement automation at the polls. And that's why that money, and you had passed it and left it in there, as far as getting laptops and computers out at the sites. Now, even though it may not necessarily, I don't know when this is gonna get implemented, but some of these changes at the polls, but what that will do is give Kate and the Board of Elections time to train their poll workers on automation at the polls so that we'll be prepared for whenever these new laws come down. And I'm not saying, Kate, that takes care of everything that you'll have to be dealing with out there, but at least you won't be starting at zero.
How much money do we have budgeted for that now?
Yeah, that wasn't very expensive, was it? The
No,
leases?
it's like
$2,400?
$2,400,
Yeah.
$2,600, I'm not sure.
Yeah.
The legislation that he's talking about that was discussed
Mm.
is actually the voter ID bill.
Yeah.
And the same, committee, the Joint Elections Oversight Committee, is looking if the voter, when, and I do expect when,
Yeah.
the voter ID bill to pass. Part of that piece of legislation requires the Joint Elections Oversight Committee to explore the use of laptops in the polling places for digital photos and other necessary requirements that would be brought down with the voter ID bill, which is what I had talked to Dawn about. I've discussed this with the Board of Elections for numerous years. Laptops are being used throughout the state by a majority of the counties. What I brought to Dawn was leasing instead of purchasing. It provides Alleghany with the minimal cost and the most current software available per election.
So the first step has been taken to deal with some of the laws that we thought may or may not be, which is looking like it's coming to fruition, may or may not be looked at. And so anyways, my point is they have the funding and the ability to take the first steps towards dealing with some of the new legislation that may come down. And that was that $2,400 for those computers that we're talking about.
Anything else? Okay, thank you for the update.
Yes, ma'am.
I would like to have in writing what you presented. I don't think we have it, do we?
No, ma'am, I have it just in talking points, but I can put that in writing for you.
I would appreciate that because I think all five of us need to contact our legislators.
I will not only put what I discussed with you in writing as far as the numbers go, but I will also provide you copies of the PCS and the original bill so that you can see where my numbers came from, where I came up with that information. If you also would like, I will provide you a copy of the voter ID bill, which is sitting in the Senate now. That's where the laptop
Okay.
Nothing
discussion came
makes
from.
me more frustrated or angry than an unfunded mandate, and this is ridiculous.
Okay.
I
Well,
apologize because that's all I am.
One thing on that, I mean, obviously, the General Assembly is trying to put credibility back in our election process with the voter ID bill and a lot of these bills. When you talk about unfunded mandates, there's roles of government. Roles of government are to do things like this and to protect our most precious, valuable right, and that's the right to vote. You know, governments, when you say unfunded, yes, maybe this is unfunded, but there's things we fund in this county that we have absolutely no business funding. And that's where the money comes from. We spend frivolous dollars and we tax the people on those items and spend them. you know, and there's organizations, you know, we're providing assistance to that we should. Funding elections is a responsibility of government. Ensuring that it's done properly is the responsibility of government. And that's what these bills do.
Kate, I know we got your rest of us. When we summarize this, can we break it down into different sections? One is just a basic, see, we've covered a lot of issues going on here, and some of them are political. For me, it's different, it's, you know, two things. One is they're talking about getting rid of the touchscreen machines. Okay, that's 607, which is in a study bill. So that information, when you summarize it, could that just be done,
I will break it down
It
for
just-
our discussion.
but also just for one-page summary of cost? Because I think that's gonna lie. And then all summaries on voter ID and all that other stuff is a separate summary. Because I think ultimately, I don't want to speak for the board, but those are different issues. And I think this board the majority or all of this board may have one stance on one of these issues, and you may have different stances on. So if you can break them out into separate issues in writing, that'd be great.
I will, if I could make one comment before I leave, if that is okay with the board. I understand, the General Assembly's need to bring credibility back into elections, or their desire to bring it. What I don't see working in elections and conducting them in the way that I do is the credibility of elections. I've worked with all 100 counties, and I can honestly say that North Carolina has some of the most honest directors of elections in the state. And they work very hard to make sure that all of the elections are fair, impartial, most of the time to the detriment of themselves within the county. I understand that question. What bothers me is when our legislators don't take the time to come and actually observe. That's why I said, please invite them, because I would more than anything welcome that opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you for your work.
Folks, we need to declare a short recess here.